It's 1992, and the first text message ever was sent out. And in the UK, dial-up internet access became available to the general public for the first time. I guess it was all over from that moment on.
You already know my name, and you can see that I'm a machine.
I'm afraid, yes.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Pokutska, your podcast host. I'm a critic and author of Feeding the Monster, and in this series of the Final Girls podcast, I'm journeying through the intersections of horror and technology, from the first robots of the silent era to the most recent and the very dated AI villains. Over the next few months, we are deep diving into machines. Every episode, I'm joined by a guest to discuss a film or two and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. The first virtual reality headset, called the Sword of Damocles, was created way back in 1968 at the University of Utah. But even in the 90s, the word VR meant nothing to Hollywood executives or the general public. Except for one man. A man who went to a convention and became obsessed and convinced that VR was the next big thing. That man was Brett Leonard, the writer and director of The Lawnmower Man, the highly problematic and hugely inventive tech horror from 1992 about a scientist who experiments on an intellectually disabled man using VR. I pair this with Brainscan, a somewhat cult horror flick starring a teenage Edward Furlong as a young, lonely horror fan who unleashes a trickster demon creature by playing an interactive horror game. Both of these are questionable in many ways, but have really fascinating ideas at the heart of them. Joining me to discuss these two extremely contentious 90s relics is Amber T, the head news writer for FANGORIA magazine and friend of the pod. Please be warned, there are spoilers for both of these films. Remember to subscribe and review the podcast if you enjoyed this episode, and you can see what other films I've discussed and I'm going to be discussing over on our Letterboxd page. Do let me know your thoughts about what you would do if you were turned into a cyber god by dropping me a line on hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk. And if you wish to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. And with all of that said, please enjoy our conversation about The Lawnmower Man and Brainscan. I really, really appreciate that you watched these two films for me, and also it's a safe space. And when you told me you hadn't seen them before, I had not seen them before either.
I mean, I'm so glad that, because when you emailed me, I was like, oh god, everyone's gonna think I'm like a fake horror fan and a hack. But then when you said you hadn't seen them either, I was like, oh, okay, well then we're all good here. And honestly, like now that I've seen them, like I just said to you, I'm like, I don't feel bad for not having seen it. It's not like I haven't seen, I don't know, Halloween or something. It's The Lawnmower Man.
Yeah, it's they're two very special motion pictures.
Very special. That's a great way to describe them.
It's one of those things where we'll get into it, and you know, they're so of their time, but also so, especially The Lawnmower Man, have such weird connections with unbelievably talented people who went on to make way bigger films.
Right, yeah.
Where do you think, in general, that both of these films, The Lawnmower Man and Brainscan, kind of stand in horror culture?
So even though I hadn't seen them before, I had definitely heard of both of these films, and it was always kind of in tandem with the phrase like "so bad it's good" or cheesy or cult classic. But I also feel like I've seen these films parodied or like riffed on in something like The Simpsons or a lot of like 90s cultural things. I feel like, you know, I was born in 91, so I kind of grew up in that mid to late 90s. And I feel like I had definitely seen either clips of both of these films or just kind of knew about their standing in pop culture. And it's really, I honestly feel like both of them felt very, when I was watching them, I was like, these are pretty ahead of their time in terms of, you know, these themes of technology and the blending of lines between reality and the virtual reality. These are things we're still exploring now. You know, something like I Saw the TV Glow, which came out last year, that very much feels like it could be discussed. Obviously, I Saw the TV Glow is much better, but
Yep.
I think so anyway. But it's those same kind of, that blending of boundaries and that existence in that kind of liminal tech space. So yeah, I thought, you know, they both have, as cheesy and silly as they might get, I think they're two really important films actually when you're discussing that kind of subgenre.
I love it. I love that we're coming into it with a very sweet approach to these two films, because I think I kind of agree, and that's why I like coming at them through this, especially looking at it through the lens of tech horror and looking at the technology and the liminality of a virtual world as well, or an online space. And it's so interesting that this is how horror saw these areas before they were public, really. Like, especially the Lawnmower Man, when we talk about it, I'm really fascinated with the behind the scenes of it, as well as with the text itself, because it really is one of the first images that we have of an online liminal space. Before we were even using the word online, it was all like cyber and virtual and all this shit. And Brainscan, I think, is a little bit more conservative and a bit more trad in how it uses that, but still has some really interesting points. And there's a couple of things that are coming up next week that we're discussing, one of them including another film by Brett Leonard, the director of The Lawnmower Man, called Virtuosity, which also are, you know, interested in what it means to exist in a world that is not physical, but it's digital. But obviously all of these machines and these spaces are man-made. So what does it all mean? What does it all mean? It gets very confusing. But I wanted to get your kind of first impressions of The Lawnmower Man, saying that it's your first watch.
Oh God. I mean, I feel like I had to keep reminding myself while I was watching that I am watching this in 2025. I am not watching it in 1992 when it came out. So I had to kind of approach it I had to kind of shift that hyper terminally online mindset that I have and approach it with more sincerity, because when this film came out, like you said, this was really one of the first films to explore how the cyberverse or the online would look. And obviously we know now that we're in that dystopian future, we know that it doesn't look like that at all. And when we're looking back at it now, it looks like a Tim and Eric sketch, or it looks like a PlayStation 1 cutscene. But at the time, audiences were probably like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is really what's happening inside my computer. I don't know, maybe they were that naive, or maybe they were also thinking like, no, this is ridiculous. But it was, if nothing else, it was a spectacle. I have never really seen the cyber world depicted like that before. But then when you think about all the kind of ways that we saw it depicted later in the late 90s, you can really trace it back to these kind of, I don't know, it looks like a vaporwave Tumblr post. That's what I kept thinking. I was like, oh, that's where this aesthetic comes from. It all comes back to the Lawnmower Man.
I mean, honestly, and I kept thinking of like the Windows screensavers, you know, all those jazzy ones that were inbuilt into your Microsoft 1990 or Windows 1995. And I just think, is this a Lawnmower Man reference? Because it could be. I bet those software programmers were fans of this film.
Absolutely, yeah. One of my favorite reviews on Letterboxd actually called this film the longest screensaver of all time, which I thought was pretty on point. But no, it's one of those things like those chicken and egg things where you're like, did the Lawnmower Man create the aesthetic, or was the Lawnmower Man inspired by this kind of aesthetic that was coming out of the early 90s. It's very interesting to look at it from now, obviously, when we know that virtual reality actually ended up looking more like the metaverse, or Mark Zuckerberg in front of the Eiffel Tower looking just looks so boring. I wish we did have this Lawnmower Man world.
Yeah, just floating around inside neon-colored shapes.
I would love that.
Sounds lovely.
So much. I really want that for us.
So how does this film, and this is what's very interesting to me about the backstory. This is one of the first, and I believe the director, Brett Leonard, claims it is the very first film to represent or even use the words virtual reality on screen. And it starts with this, like, very threatening message on the screen, like virtual reality is going to be commonplace by the end of the millennium. I mean, kind of true, but not in this way. It's more of, it's the metaverse. It's like creative immersive projects that artists and filmmakers are using to tell stories. It's for playing video games. It's for porn. Like, there's so many other uses for it. But what I find fascinating is that it does come from a deeply sincere appreciation for the possibilities of technology.
Yes.
So apparently the director went to like a convention and tried on a VR headset, and his little mind was blown, and he was like, this is amazing. This is a movie. This is the future. This is the next big thing. And nobody understood what it even meant when he was trying to pitch it. So him and his creative and life partner had to create a 20-minute presentation to explain what VR was. And this is VR in the early 90s, okay? This is not VR now. I just think we all have to go back to that mindset of like, these words have never been heard. This is gobbledygook being pitched by a filmmaker. So what do you think of the way that VR is represented here?
I think, like you said, there is that real sense of awe in it, because I guess going back to that time, kind of late 80s, early 90s, the technology that we take for granted now, it was still in very early days, but it progressed so quickly. They went from one generation, they went from having a landline phone to having a cell phone to having an Oculus VR or whatever. So I think the way that VR is presented, it's really, you can feel that they were scared of it back then, or they were like that. They were both scared of in awe of the possibilities that it could bring. And I think you see that in kind of there is a sense of fear, I think, running through this movie, and I do think it's, when we look at it now, obviously it's easy to giggle at that and kind of laugh at it a bit, because we know that most of the people using VR these days are like, I don't know, playing horror games, or like mums using the VR Oculus on Facebook to go and chat with Mark Zuckerberg. But you really do have to go back and put yourself in that mindset that it would have been a very scary possibility, the idea of uploading your consciousness and existing outside of the body, which is something that I think in the world we're living in now, we're kind of coming to terms to the fact that might be how we exist in the future. But yeah, I think it's definitely up there with films like The Matrix, where this kind of brave new world, filmmakers were kind of exploring this unknown precipice. And yeah, I think it's that great combination of fear and awe that we maybe don't see in films about technology anymore, because we're all very jaded by it now.
Yeah. I also, what I find fascinating about this particular vision of VR is that it feels like, especially when it comes to the ending and what Job becomes, is that it's almost like they've discovered a different reality, as opposed to they have created a machine with graphics in it that lets you sort of feel a bit floaty because it messes around with your center of balance and stuff. It's as if when they're in the, oh my gosh, what is it? What do they call it? It's a specific name they use for the thingy.
They keep calling it like the mainframe and things like that.
The gyrosphere.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I should laugh because that's so sincere, but come on.
I know. And I'm looking at images of it now, and it's like this enormous, and I know because I've read the backstory that they compared it to the Vitruvian Man, the sketch by Leonardo da Vinci.
I can see that, yeah.
I can see that. So the inspiration for this, for the listeners, for anyone who has not seen the Lawnmower yet, the gyrosphere is essentially this enormous set of metallic circles, and you have to wear a very tight, slinky suit, special VR suit that lights up when you're plugged in. It's very tight. It helps that both Pierce Brosnan and Jeff Fahey are
built.
Very built. Unbelievably tight suits that they wear full LED mask level VR headsets covering their entire faces, gloves, little VR sockies, the whole gang, and they're sort of attached by the middle of this gyrosphere frame. And they're floating, so none of their limbs are touching any surface. They're sort of just held by cables. And as the gyrosphere gyrates around them, they also gyrate and kind of float and fly in the virtual reality space. Mm-hmm. None of this makes sense as I say it out loud, and it doesn't make sense in a visual language either. But that's what it is. That's where we are. What I find amazing is that it literally portrays Dr. Angelo, who's Pierce Brosnan's character, as someone who has discovered a new world, as opposed to coded it in. The way that they talk about the mainframe and virtual reality, it's something that is now another plane of existence that can influence our world, and that I'm into, because it has nothing to do with actual VR.
I love it. I absolutely love. I'm so fascinated by one of my favorite pieces of media is the anime series Serial Experiments Lain, where a young girl, I won't spoil it, but a young girl who gets connected into the internet, which in the show they call the Wired, and as the show goes on, you do start to realize that the internet, as we know it, and I guess technology in the case of the Lawnmower Man, this virtual reality, it does kind of exist on another plane of existence that we have somehow been granted access to. It's very existential. I will say that about the Lawnmower Man.
So much. What do you find existentially troubling about it?
I mean, a lot of it. When I was watching this film, I was surprised at how connected it is with religion. And obviously Job being this very spiritual, his name is Job for a start, which I'm not familiar with the Bible hugely, but I do know that he was a very important character in the Bible, one of many. But he, we kind of are introduced to him as this salt of the earth, this God-fearing man who, and then he eventually, as he gets more power and he gets more intelligence from this virtual world, he becomes God in itself. And I don't know. I kept thinking while I was watching it, I was like, this is starting to make me think about my place as a human being in a post-religion world.
Oh my god! I cannot believe that you had a whole breakthrough in your faith because of the Lawnmower Man of all films.
Thank you, Pierce Brosnan. You've made me a Christian now.
That is exactly what the film wanted to achieve. I mean, the Christ parallels between Job and kind of the cyber god that he becomes. There is, I mean, even the tagline on the poster of the film in the original release was "God made me simple, scientists made me a god."
Oh my god. That does get God made me simple is cracking me up because it's so awful. But it is that very, and I think that comes from that combination of fear and awe that we talked about earlier, whereas that is what religious people feel when it comes to God. And if you were unfamiliar with virtual reality at the time and it was still new, you would think oh my god, this is crazy. We shouldn't have this much power.
Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of Cher. one person should not have that much power.
I mean, she is God, so
She is. She is in my house. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we need to get the Job of it all out of the way, because I don't think this was okay in 1992.
No.
With 2025 eyes, it is stunning just how awful it is.
Terrible.
There's no point in describing exactly how this film fails on every single level, because Job is portrayed as a character with an intellectual disability or possibly neurodivergent, but it is very much, and I find it's not just a portrayal of him and how he gets implanted with some science juice and
that's the technical term for it.
That is the technical and science juice. And then he gets so smart that he becomes evil and power hungry and sociopathic, and eventually plugs himself into the digital mainframe and becomes a cyber god and is no longer embodied, but is a kind of a brain only entity that exists only through the electrical currents. But it's the fact that Dr. Angelo thinks that VR and his experiments are something that the world needs, that anyone who is wired differently needs fixing, and that it is his right and his mission to fix people. And I wonder what you thought about the relationship between Dr. Angelo and Job.
Well, yeah, Job is a pretty terrible representation of any neurodivergent person, because he goes from this, when we first meet him, he is that terrible, almost simple Jack archetype. He can't take care of himself. He's a baby who lives, like a man baby who lives in the woods. He's very naive. He's very vulnerable, and he's presented as a laughing stock at the beginning of the film, basically. But then as he does get to this other state, he also embodies this other stereotypical presentation of like neurodivergent people, and especially autistic people, where they're like this emotionless savant, this genius who has no connection with humanity. So both presentations of Job as an intellectually disabled person are terrible. They're both two ends of the spectrum of sensationalization, I guess. And then Dr. Angelo kind of has that. It's very eugenics coded in that he wants to use this technology to, like you said, fix Job, but there's nothing wrong with Job where there is in presentation, but as a person, as a character, he's fine. And it kind of reminded me of this argument I've seen recently for AI and ChatGPT, where a lot of people who are pro ChatGPT and pro AI are saying, oh, well, this technology gives disabled people a chance to make art. And I think that's very patronizing in a way, because disabled people can make art and have made art
for years and centuries
and years, and very much have valid art that sometimes relates to their experience and sometimes doesn't relate to their experience. But to say that disabled people need this kind of soulless technology to have their art or their creation be valid in any way, I think is really disgusting. And that's kind of what I was thinking when I was watching Dr. Angelo try and, fix Job and bring his intelligence up. And I do kind of like that he gets his comeuppance in the end, but he doesn't really. I think
he doesn't.
He doesn't. No, that I say that out loud. He gets away with it. He does get away with it. And poor Job is the one who is trapped. Yes, he does become this cyber god, and it is implied at the end that he is going to take over the world, but he's not happy.
No. And also, I think when I was watching this film, I was looking at it and thinking, wait, are we supposed to be on Pierce Brosnan's side here? Because just because he's good looking does not mean he's playing a good character. And let me qualify that. Like, this is pre-James Bond Pierce Brosnan. This is a man at the peak of his attractiveness. But my God, he is a disgusting eugenicist and fully a predator.
Yes.
And this is what I find kind of interesting about this film, like, because this is one where it is a scientist, a man, essentially being exhibiting predatory behavior towards another grown man because he sees himself as like being above him, not just intellectually, but kind of on a human and moral level, because he's a scientist, a man of science. And here is this, intellectually disabled, God-fearing man who he thinks he can just, all of the things that he does in the film are absolutely could be literally transplanted into a different story that is a drama about a child molester.
Yeah, definitely.
He cases him down, lures him into his basement, gives him a treat and a game to play with, and then puts the science juice in him. And he's like, oh, by the way, that's for your own good. Don't tell anyone.
Very much so.
It's awful.
And then again, like you said, I was very confused throughout if I'm supposed to root for him, because at first I thought the film was, and I think it maybe is trying to go for this almost Dr. Frankenstein, where he's like the mad scientist, but at his heart, he thinks he's doing well, but his hubris and the thrill of the power kind of eventually overrides whatever good intentions he might have had. But I couldn't get on board with that, because like you said, the whole time I was like, leave poor Job alone. Like, I don't care about your noble quest to IQify him. Like, leave Job alone.
Also, his entire quote-unquote noble quest is to what? Make people smarter, and he's taking money from a very shady organization who just want to use it for warfare, which is, a very classic trope. It's very X-File-y. Good for them. It's very simple. But he goes off and erupts at the people who are giving him money because he's like, you're, misusing my invention. Mate, do you know what you're doing in your own basement?
You've got kids down there.
Jesus.
I know, but like, what is, like you said, his goal is to make people smarter. Okay. Can we not do that? Like, why? Why?
I mean, the science of this is very dubious, because I'm sorry, how is the VR making people smarter?
Well, there's a great scene where Job is like, I don't know, he's doing that Fifth Element thing where he's absorbing all of the information, and then he's like, oh, we don't need books anymore. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure if that's supposed to be ironic or not.
Do you know what the Lawnmower Man and Job is kind of prescient about? It's more about, the words AI are never uttered. It's all VR in the film. But you know that AI, or those robots that were, either put in really horrible factories to do repetitive work, the kind that we subject people to, and they just self-destructed because they couldn't take it. Or you know how AI, if it's fed like all the heinous, hateful, hate speech and awful, terrible writings that has been published over the centuries, they become like evil because they just absorb the information and learn based on the information they're given. I have a feeling that Job is essentially like a physical representation of ChatGPT, where it's like it's absorbed too much.
Yes. Yeah.
But all the wrong things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you were to sit down and like have the entirety of human history beamed into your brain, you're not going to come out of that and think, wow, what a great thing.
I know how to fix everything.
I know how to fix it. No, you're going to be a weird, hate-filled, angry monster.
Exactly. And even, before, during the middle process of Job kind of changing, after he is changed by Dr. Angelo, what do you think between the two extremes of how he starts, how he is, and how he ends up being a cyber god? What do you think of those middle bits as he evolves and the chaos that he wreaks on other people?
Well, yeah, it's very much, at that point, I was, very much about, a lot of this film is about masculinity and men and how men deal with new surges of power. But I was also thinking a lot about puberty. And, when we first meet Job, he is presented as a child, basically, even though he's not. He's a grown man. And Pierce Brosnan, Dr. Angelo, literally says, like, multiple times, like, he has a child's brain. He's a child. So then if that's his starting point and then his ending point is, like, the cyber god, then almost this transitional stage is him coming to terms with his mind changing and his body changing, and he seems very uncomfortable with it for a long time, and there's a lot of things that he doesn't want to talk about and tell people. So I think that that transitional state, I was thinking a lot about how, that is a very like a representation of puberty in a way.
And it's also, and there's a point where he says, Dr. Angelo, I think people can tell that I'm changing.
Yes.
And when he starts off, he's only friends with the kids. And then all of a sudden he gets the attention of this grown woman, this like very, very horny neighbor that just goes after him. I felt deeply uncomfortable by those scenes. The women aren't painted in a great light in this film. But yeah, the way that he suddenly goes from this childlike, in their words, childlike man to suddenly every other man in this is forcing him and, egging him on to have sex with a woman as if that's, that's the next step he needs to take to quote unquote become a man. But the way they talk about her is really strange when like whores do it for money. She just does it for fun. I don't know. It felt very odd. Or, it's very animalistic. Or when I think it was who's Job who says this will be the best ride of your life, Marnie. I'm like, okay. I mean, the sex scene itself, the dragonfly. I mean, all of it. But then it is apparently so great that it just completely lobotomizes Marnie. And she just wanders off into the night. Oh, if only. I know. I mean, there's so many things. Well, I really want to talk to you about the ending, though. Because as Job kind of goes full cyber villain, what about that finale and the logic of it? Is there a logic? And what happens to Job? I actually did really like the finale. I loved the image of all the phones ringing. Yes, that was a great ending. I actually thought that was really chilling. And it, that's an image. Having not seen Lawnmower Man before this, I was thinking there was a recent episode of Black Mirror, I think it was, that had a very similar premise where everything around the world would start going off all at once, and that was the signal that the virtual thing had taken over. But I actually really loved that end bit because to me, I got the impression that Job has completely transcended and become, he's ditched the physical body entirely, and he now exists in everyone's technological device, which, problems with Job, problems with the film aside, I love that idea. That really scares me, of like a god that exists within every piece of technology. I haven't seen the sequel, so I don't know if the sequel goes there, but it should. Yeah, I also thought that, because if you just take the aesthetics of it, because the finale, the big confrontation between Dr. Angelo and Job happens in this virtual reality space. And, it goes there. Like, it's sort of half human face. Everything is distorted. Like, everything is going big, 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 big. But then really Job gets trapped in this virtual reality plane and cannot escape. But that final scene, you're right, he succeeds. Like, his plan has happened. And that's the ending of the film. It is both a deeply chilling ending and kind of like, I think, the germ, the actual nugget of the great idea that Brett Leonard's. It's both a chilling ending and also the distillation of the nugget of the great idea that Brett Leonard had, which is about like a cyber god, like something that exists in all of technology. And I mean, I'm quickly becoming someone who, as I watch a lot of these 80s and 90s horror films that are like kind of flawed or very flawed like this, but have a germ of a fabulous idea, I'm like, remake that. I want to see a remake of The Lawnmower Man. Because I agree, like, that is such a scary premise. Like, everything, not just technology itself, just going haywire, not just a mechanical being awakened by someone who has had a human experience and who transcends and abandons a body. Like, it's great, scary. It's really scary. And I think like I said, now if we remade it, it's even more prescient because
well, we've all got phones now, not to sound like a boomer, like we were always on those phones, but we are always on those phones.
Mhm.
So, the thought that your cell phone could have a little part of a god or a little fragment of a malevolent Job person in it I love that. I'd love to see it.
I'm kind of into it. And like the more we talk about it, it's like the existential element of this as well is that we don't have like someone who wants to make money off of this VR, right? So we have the shady organization and Dr. Angelo who wants to, quote unquote, fix everyone that he considers below him. But then Job he's not making money out of this VR.
No.
It's all about this, like, we can't really wrap our heads, or at least I can't, around what is it that you want out of existing in this plane? And I think it's just this idea of total abstract power, right?
Yes.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, because like you said, he has no financial beneficial gain. He's gone from living this happy but simple life in the woods, mowing those lawns, to being this all-encompassing thing that literally just wants to control and have that power over one. And that to me is way more scary than, like an evil corporation. Yeah.
And also I would like to see more of these stories, and I've been enjoying them, particularly in this era, because I think because we did not have so much first-hand knowledge or access to this tech in the 90s. Again, I sound like a boomer. Like I was a kid at that time, so I wasn't interacting with it either. But it wasn't so readily available. So when you watch these films, like there's just these vast planes of imagination where they're like, oh my God, it's a different sphere for humans. It's like a new planet. What does it mean? We can be gods in this virtual world? There's no, it just exists on its own, and we can create it, and we can create ourselves into, being dragonflies if we want to. We can fly amongst the pink shapes. It's kind of really bold.
And we're so jaded by it now that, there probably is a VR out there that will let you fly around as a dragonfly. And we're just like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Because we're so oversaturated now with all this new technology that we just don't care anymore.
Shall we briefly talk about how it is supposedly based on a Stephen King short story, but absolutely has nothing to do with it, and everyone except Brett Leonard got sued because of that? Because I personally find that really funny.
Stephen King is like, I love that Stephen King doesn't take any shit.
Love the man.
He will get into the trenches and he will fight you over the misuse of his name. But yeah, I was very confused. I'm not hugely versed in all Stephen King stories and books, but when I was reading up about it, I was like, so the one real part of the Lawnmower Man film that comes from a Stephen King book is the part where Job uses his telekinesis to kill someone with a lawnmower. Yeah. And that's like one scene. And they built this whole film from this one stupid little scene. I just love it.
Well, it's like, it got even weirder than that. So Stephen King published this story called The Lawnmower Man, like in the 70s, I think 1975 or 76. And it was about a man who hires a man to mow his lawn, but the Lawnmower Man has a relationship, like a sexual relationship with the lawnmower. And the lawnmower is sentient. And the Lawnmower Man also eats the grass that the lawnmower mows. It gets real weird. It was published.
Can we see that movie?
Yeah. Someone make that. Also, it was published in a men's erotic magazine in the 70s. Okay, and then in Night Shift, I think. So it has a lot going for it. But so essentially, Brett Leonard pitched this VR film called Cyber God, but the production company had the rights to the short story, The Lawnmower Man, and they were like, "Well, can you fit this in here so we can put Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man and it will sell better?"
I mean, you have to admire, in a way, the audacity.
I love the hustle.
Yeah.
But then my favorite part was that, obviously, you know how they had to screen the film for Stephen King. And Stephen King loved the film, but he also told Brett Leonard Then he was like, it's got nothing to do with my story, so everyone's getting sued, but not you, because I like the film.
I mean, which is probably the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Because, there's, even when it's not, even though we know it's not really based on it, it still has that association with Stephen King. And I feel like any association with Stephen King is going to do your horror movie pretty good. And from what I know, this film did do pretty well.
It did. It made bang.
Yeah.
Yeah, it made a lot of money. And also apparently James Cameron loved it. And he hired the cinematographer and I believe the production designer from the film. And I think the cinematographer won an Oscar for one of the films that he worked on with James Cameron. He did the cinematography on Titanic, on the Avatar movies. Like, they've worked together consistently for years since then.
I mean, James Cameron's all about the tech, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He was probably watching this, and that was like, boom, Avatar. That's the seeds of Avatar being... But I wonder if, in like 50, 60 years, we will watch something like Avatar and be like, oh my God, that looks awful. That's so cheesy.
I mean... I kind of do that now, but I kind of did that in 2009 as well. But I just think for comparison, and, I might just be reading out numbers that are, obviously a lot of this is reported over the decades and so on. But it's interesting that Terminator 2, which is really lauded as being extremely consequential in terms of special effects, came out just a year before The Lawnmower Man and had 7 minutes of special effects, with a budget of 120 million for the whole film. And this little Lawnmower Man film had a $5 million budget and had 27 minutes of special effects.
Damn.
So they did a lot with very little.
They did. And again, I know we giggle and laugh about it from our 2025 point of view, but it's so creative. Yeah. Like, they really did
It's shooting
there.
For the stars.
Really shooting for the stars. Like, they didn't have to have a cyberspace set sex scene in which people turn into a dragonfly. They didn't have to do that, but they did it for us.
For us.
For us. And I appreciate it for you and me right now. And I appreciate that because it's very creative.
Do you know what? I have a lot of time for Brett Leonard because that man gave us The Lawnmower Man, but even better, he gave us Virtuosity.
Which I ashamedly haven't seen. So but now I've seen The Lawnmower Man. I'm bumping that up the list.
I think you should.
100%.
Yeah. Also, that had a lot more budget and it has Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe.
Oh, sold. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm watching that today.
Yeah. But moving on to Brainscan, which is, I would say, like a much less ambitious movie in terms of effects and so on, but also a first watch for both of us.
Yes.
And isn't really about a scientist or some big technical invention, but really is a kind of a classic horror story of isolated, angsty teen, big horror fan, connects with something evil online. What did you make what were your first impressions of Brainscan?
Well, it was so funny because while I was watching it, I was like, this is so dumb. I love it. Like, there's something about this aesthetic of like this 90s. I grew up with a lot of male cousins and had male little boyfriends, teenage boyfriends. So this 90s boys' room aesthetic is very comforting to me. And, I thought I'd never seen Brainscan before, and I'm not sure I have, but this is this is just a tangent. I'm sorry, I just have to say it. When I was young, when I was about 5, 6, I used to have this series of recurring nightmares about this metalhead called Uncle Bob. And if you put 666, if you dial 666 into your landline, Uncle Bob would come to your house and kill you with electric guitar. And do you know who Uncle Bob looked just like?
Like the trickster?
The trickster.
Oh my God. Do you know what I think? Okay, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you here, Amber, but do you know what might have happened? Because what you're describing is literally the plot of Slumber Party Massacre.
Oh my God. So like I said, I hung around a lot of boys who were a bit older than me. They were probably watching these movies when I was little, and I probably like sucked in those images. Yeah, for sure.
Have you ever watched a Slumber Party Massacre?
I haven't. Now you've told me that. I'm like, I swear I haven't seen that but maybe I have because I had these dreams.
So the killer there, has an electric guitar, particularly, I think it's Summer Party Massacre Part 2. He has an electric guitar with a grill at the end of it, and that's what he kills, like a drill at the end of it, and he kills people with that.
So I've definitely seen this film before, because there was no way my 5-year-old mind was that creative.
That's amazing.
So there you go.
So, okay, well, let's stick with the trickster at first, because he's brought back some
Uncle
childhood Uncle Bob. What do you think of the trickster? Like, hate him?
There's something so repugnant about his design, which is good, for a horror movie. It's good. He just looks like this, he's such a specific product of that late 80s, early 90s aesthetic. He is a really interesting, because when you see, if you don't know about Brainscan and you just see a picture of the trickster, you might think this is like your traditional slasher from that era, but there's something more interesting to him where, his name is the trickster. I like to think of him as this kind of trickster god of the cyber realm.
Yeah, that's more than the film gives us.
Yeah. Yeah, because in the film he's not there and then he's there and then he's just part of the plot. Okay, this man's along for the ride now. But I like to, I went as fleshing out the story of my own mind because I had to. I like to think of him as some kind of like Anansi trickster figure. But then also it's kind of implied that he's a part of Michael.
Yeah, he's completely imagined by Michael.
Yeah. So I also like that kind of manifestation of Michael's darker side. Which I do think plays into a lot of themes, like you said, of teen isolation. And Michael's character is this kid who his mum's died, he's injured, he can't go out, his dad's never home. So this trickster kind of rushes in to fill that almost weird father figure void in a way.
I almost thought that again, we're like doing the screenwriter's job for them, for 30 years after the fact. But I almost feel like I really wanted it to be maybe like related to the father, that this was his manifestation of what he wanted or what he thought of his dad to look like. And I don't think we didn't ever get to see his dad, do we? We just hear him on the phone. I really thought that he was going to turn up and it was going to be the same actor who plays the trickster, and you'd be like, oh, it was the dad. That would be so good. That would have been so much better.
That would make sense.
Yeah, as opposed to it's just like, oh, it's Michael imagining things because he watches too many horror movies and plays too many video games.
Yeah, I wish they'd kind of fleshed out his existence, because I feel like we see more of Igor, the little VR assistant. We see more of him. I want to know his story. In my life. I love Igor. Igor's chill.
He's so great. He also the technology that Michael uses. Where was this?
Right.
In 1994, a teenager could have a voice-activated digital assistant that would dial things for him through the computer and then just hold his calls.
It's so funny. I love it. This is my favorite aesthetic, and I kind of wish, now we're actually in that future. Everything's boring because it was designed by all these like Silicon Valley tech bros, but I wish everything had more like clunky buttons and interfaces. Like,
you know what I miss? I miss one of those phones where you had to put your finger in the hole and rotate the whole thing to dial a number.
Bring back the rotary phone.
Yeah, I miss a rotary phone. I might get one as a joke. I don't even have a landline, but I just want one of those rotary phones. But I don't know if you felt this way, but it felt like really weirdly conservative. The reveal that the trickster was actually part of Michael's, subconscious or whatever.
Yes. I mean, it's the whole film I felt was very much that kind of product of that moral panic time where like, video games will make you scary and violent, and I don't think Michael is portrayed particularly well. I mean, that could be a lot to do with Edward Furlong's performance, which isn't great. I know he was like 15 at the time, so I'm not too mad about it, but
he had a rough time after that, but my God, he's giving nothing. He's giving
nothing, and I do, I know he's an actor who has done some very unforgivable things, but he's also an actor who went through a lot of shit as a kid. So it's kind of, when I see him giving nothing, I'm almost like, yeah, okay, you were 15 and you were having a bad time. But what was I saying? Yeah, the film doesn't present him. It's almost like in a way like he deserves what happens to him because he likes horror and he likes staying at home and playing video games.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that a crime now? Am I going to expect the trickster to show up in my house? Because all I do is stay home and watch horror movies.
He's coming for you. Uncle Bob's coming.
No, I don't want that. No, thank you. If that's what's gonna happen if I get a rotary phone and dial 666, I don't want it.
Yes, my dream, it will come true.
But it does feel like even the trickster is just so like, this is what's gonna happen if you play video games and watch horror movies.
Yes,
you're gonna lose your mind. You're gonna fabricate a creature, you're gonna kill your friends, you're gonna kill everyone, and you're not gonna remember it. You're basically gonna have a whole like split personality. Mm-hmm. But there's also an element of like, is this what Michael wants to be seen at? As this like kind of weird looking mohawk, like leather clad, glitch demon?
I mean, he's kind of cool. I mean, yeah, he is like, he's very much that kind of conservative adult's idea of what a rebellious punk type figure would look like. And I do think, I think part of that is what Michael wants. Like I said, he's frustrated, he's lonely, he probably does have these kind of dark and violent thoughts like a lot of teenagers do, and the trickster kind of gives him that outlet. But yeah, it's a surprisingly conservative film.
I mean, I'm not surprised considering the timing of when it came out, because this film comes out like a year after the controversy around Night Trap, which is a video game that prompted in the United States Senate hearings on violence in video games. And then those hearings resulted in the creation of the video game rating system. So there was already like the moral panic around video games essentially inciting violence in people who played them was at its peak. And you get this like, kind of B-movie horror film about a demon creature, a killing creature that comes out of someone playing a horror video game. It's not on purpose, I think.
No, definitely not. No, it is very much when I was watching it, I couldn't help thinking of all the things I remember hearing and seeing in the media at that time, which was about the Resident Evil games and how if you shoot someone in the game, it changes your brain chemistry. And well, it didn't, because I'm always shooting people in Resident Evil and they're always killing me back because I'm crap at it. But it was very, very much a 90s specific. We still have moral panics now, obviously, but I do think the video game one has kind of tapered off a bit, thankfully.
And what do you think about Brainscan? What do you think Brainscan does with the idea of an interactive horror game? Because Brainscan, the film, is titled after Brainscan, the video game that exists in the film that, gets delivered to Michael. And the idea being that the game is so realistic that it like sucks you in and you end up sort of losing track of what's real, what's not.
I do both of these films, as much as I'm slagging them off a bit, I think they both have really interesting ideas. And that one, I really love the idea of a game that is so interactive that it does pull you in until to the point where you're unable to tell. Something like Existence by David Cronenberg, which I do think does this better, but that came later, so it does have the benefit of hindsight. But it's interesting because you do see in Brainscan kind of a prototype to a lot of these screen life movies.
Yes.
Something like Deadware, where people are... That line between reality and game is blurred further. And what I found really interesting in Brainscan is that Michael is the horror. When he goes into the game, he is the horror. He's not being chased or hounded by a killer. He is doing the killing. So again, it goes back to that moral panic thing of like, if you are playing these violent video games, you are going to become a killer. You're not going to be in danger. You will become the danger.
That's so true. That's so true. And I think that is the panicky conservative view that is underlined in the entire film.
Yeah, and so, it's also Michael is that very specific teenage boy who was at the heart of this moral panic. I feel like teenage girls definitely got off a bit easier with it, but yeah, young boys were really the focus of this fear back then.
Well, also Michael is portrayed as like a kind of counterculture-y teenage boy, like he's got first of all, I think it's adorable that there is a horror film club
It's so sweet.
in the
It's so
in the
sweet.
school. I'm like, these are so cute.
Mm-hmm.
They make little flyers and they watch Death, Death, Death Part 2. But, I think it's really also deeply embedded with the fear around grunge and counterculture as a whole, as it was becoming very trendy and much absorbed by pop culture as a whole. At the same time, it's Generation X, right?
Yes.
And how scared boomers were because it was kind of rejecting all of the things that were considered good, valid, and quote unquote the norm. And it was making money as well at the same time, which is something that I don't think generationally, it's always a core generational divide when the previous generation cannot understand why something is financially or economically successful that they don't prescribe any value to, and they just try to erase it.
That's your rotary phone going on. That was perfect timing. That was like, I froze then. I was like, Uncle Bob?
He's going to leave that in the edit. His voice, Uncle Bob, he's coming up now.
He's coming
up. And I wonder, tying both of these films together a bit, you mentioned it when we were talking about The Lawnmower Man, but these are films about masculinity in so many ways. Like, I don't even think there's one love interest in Brainscan, like another teenage girl, but really it is about Michael. The entire film, if we really drill it down, is about Michael learning to tell his best friend that he loves him.
Yes. And what a sweet moment.
So cute.
At the end, where he's like, Kyle, my best friend. Also, Kimberly is a teenager and they get way too close up to her. And a lot of scenes I was quite uncomfortable. But yeah, no, it is very much a film. Even if I feel like if you took the trickster out of it, you would have a pretty strong, for all its conservative, weird moral panic stuff aside, it's still a pretty strong story about a young boy who's lost his mother, and the masculine role model in his life doesn't exist because he's always away. And Kyle is really the only other male figure in his life, and he inadvertently ends up killing him. And when he comes back, when it flashes back to reality at the end, Kyle is the person he's most excited to see, which is very cute.
It's really adorable. But both The Lawnmower Man and Brainscan are about two men boys, who get a surge of power. What do you think the films do with this idea of suddenly empowered men and how they deal with having access to a power that they didn't have before?
I think it's really interesting, especially when you look at kind of gender expectations of that time. Obviously, these days we know that women and non-binary people and people of all kinds of genders, people like games, people like technology. Games and technology are not just a male thing. But back then, they pretty much were. The doors very much were not open to women to access these spaces and kind of, even I remember playing Left 4 Dead online in like the mid-2000s and still getting yelled at online because they could hear that I was a girl in my voice. So I think there's something very specifically interesting about that intersection between men and technology, and how having this access to technology kind of rushes in to fill an almost godlike urge that maybe a lot of men have, but they don't know what to do with it because they can control everything and they can destroy things that they don't like and that they don't want in their little virtual realm. So I think it's very tempting for the men in these films, this way to exert their power and exert their masculinity in a way that they might feel robbed of in the real world for whatever reason. I think it's really interesting. I don't know if both films meant to make that comment, but I think there is something very interesting there about the fragility of these men, that they feel they need to have this complete virtual realm to actually be their true selves, when they could just be their true selves in the real world and it would be fine.
And it's also about, I think all of the secondary characters are also quite significant in the way that they play into that theme. Again, I think this is us giving the films extra credit and reading into it, because they kind of work together in a fascinating way in that form. All of the secondary characters in both films are also struggling to assert their power. So in The Lawnmower Man, it's Dr. Angelo with his science and his methods, and it's the shady money people with money, really. And in Brainscan, you've got the teacher who's trying to assert a moral power over the students by banning their interest and vilifying them. And also we haven't even said that Frank Langella is in this film as a sort of disgruntled detective who's trying to solve these murders.
Completely winging it. Sleepwalking through this film.
Listen,
I love him.
I hope he renovated his kitchen from this.
Exactly. God love him.
Yeah. So I think there's constantly this tension of like, what power are you talking about? Is this a power that I can understand or cannot understand? And if I cannot understand it, I don't want it, and I don't want anyone else to have it either. Which is the thing, like this digital space and digital power or access to a completely different plane. The other figures of authority are really, really scared by it because they don't understand it, and they don't understand it because they don't have access to it. And as such, they just want it to not exist because they cannot control it.
Yeah, and that's very much, you know, we kind of have our two chosen ones, the two characters who do end up, well, I don't know if Michael does end up controlling it really, but he tries. You know, they're both two characters that are granted access into this special realm. But you know, you see that now with people who are upset or angry that they can't control the way that they're perceived, so they do turn to technology with things again like AI and these AI bros who want to use it to make themselves look cooler or make Elon Musk look cooler because they feel like they have the right to do that. So these are two films that feel really, really relevant still, even though the technology is different. They do feel very relevant.
And I think on the technology point, one of the things that I find really interesting about how they try to film technology is that, and this is a problem with tech horror that the great late American film critic Roger Ebert said, that it's not, how exciting can it be to show someone sitting at a keyboard and staring at a screen? And it isn't. So they've tried to make technology look aesthetically exciting in The Lawnmower Man by just giving us these wild screensaver landscapes where the characters enter, and the gyrosphere that at least looks kind of fun to see someone floating around and moving around. And in Brainscan, they're literally giving us action scenes by transplanting. I mean, I don't think they had the budget to like do special effects. They just put the actors into what is essentially a fake video game world, and have to signal that is not really happening. So it's trying to make something that isn't very exciting, which is just watching a teenager sit at a laptop and play his video game, kind of appealing for cinema viewers. And that I find to be quite innovative of both of these films, because at least they tried. They're not just sticking a camera on Edward Furlong's shoulder and have him like tap at a keyboard. They're trying to make like immerse herself in the tech world.
No, absolutely, yeah. They both have a very creative spin on what was, I think, by the time Brainscan came out, we've obviously, the technology from The Lawnmower Man was very, grand and space age and inaccessible. But by the time we get to Brainscan, this is something that is already starting to be in people's houses. And something that people are starting, more and more people are getting the internet across America. So it's interesting that in that short space of time, it's gone from something that only these mad scientists have access to something that a teenage boy has access to. But one of my favorite films is Unfriended Dark Web, and that is just someone sat at a computer. So I'm happy with that too, to be honest. I like screen life movies, but I don't think an audience in the 90s would have liked screen life movies.
I like screen life movies, but I think it's very different from like literally watching someone sit at a computer and tap around.
Yes, it is. Yes,
because I love Host. I really like Unfriended. I really like those films. Even like just online analog horror films where it's essentially a PowerPoint presentation, or it's like windows closing and opening and so on.
I love that.
Like there is actually so much activity within a screen.
Yes,
that someone can do. But that is very different from just filming the back of someone's head.
Yeah, totally.
And Amber, before we wrap up, is there anything about either one of these films that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention?
I'm like I said to you, I felt like a terrible horror fan for not having seen them. And then I felt like even more of a terrible horror fan when Brainscan opens with them going through Fangoria, who I literally work for. So I was like, oh my God, I am a hack. I am a terrible imposter. But once I got over that, I was like, I kind of love... And again, I don't think it's the film doesn't want us to root for the horror fans in a way, because they're both Kyle and Michael are presented like, you know, lazy burnouts and slackers, but they've also still got this little community. You mentioned the horror club, and I really did love that. And I also love how the movie doesn't have Michael give up on those interests. You know, when it ends, he's still doing the horror club. He doesn't have to, you know, it's not like the Breakfast Club where he has to strip his interests so he can become more palatable to the audience. And I think there is, at the heart of it, there is a really nice little representation of the horror community, and how, yes, it can be quite insular and quite isolating if you're not in it, but if you can get in it, there's some really lovely people in there who will have your back if you are attacked by the trickster. They will be there for you.
I think that's a really beautiful note to end on. And Amber, where can people find more of your work online?
So I am pretty much exclusively on Blue Sky at the moment. Speaking of technological monsters, I'm not on Twitter anymore. So my handle there is Blonde Kaidan. Nice. I have some stuff coming out with... Oh, who have I got coming out? Some more stuff with 88 Films coming out. I've got some stuff with Umbrella coming out. I've got some stuff with... These are all physical media releases. I got a couple more Arrow or Second Sight pieces coming, and I will post about them on Blue Sky and on my Instagram, which is @HornBloodFire, and I post constantly, so there will be no worries about missing any of those things that I'm doing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I can't believe how well-timed Uncle Bob was. He says hello. I was actually sick. I am actually scared. I'm scared. He's standing right behind me. I'm really scared because now that you pointed out that I actually probably did take that from a real film, I hate it even more. Joe, what's really funny, this is behind the scenes for the listeners. We record this remotely, but there's no video. So when I say he's standing right next to me, you don't know whether I'm lying or not. That. I really don't like that. Please, I've got childhood trauma. Oh my God.